Welcome, comrades, in solidarity. I'm Richard Costley with Workers' World Party. Sorry for the late start. It's been a busy day and it took us a little while to get together this evening. My co-host tonight will be Megan Smith from Philadelphia.
Thank you, Richard. Please share the link to join this webinar, which you can see in the chat on the right side of your screen. You can also share from our Facebook page or on Twitter at Workers World. For those watching on Zoom, you can click the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen to type in your questions. Our speakers will be answering your questions starting at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Tonight, we'll be hearing reports from several Mayday actions across the country, and then begin a discussion on how we can build power through workers' assemblies. Those who have been regularly tuning into Workers' World Party webinars will know that tonight's session is taking place on Friday instead of Thursday. So first, we wanted to open with a brief discussion on the history of Mayday and why it is so important for our class.
Thank you, Richard. May 1st, International Workers' Day, or Mayday, is celebrated all around the world, both by the labor movement and by states officially, with the notable exception of the US state. Mayday was established on May 1st to fall around the anniversary of the Haymarket Affair in Chicago. The Haymarket Affair refers to the fallout after a provocateur bombing at a peaceful workers' demonstration on May 4th, 1886, supporting a strike for an 8-hour workday. Despite a total lack of evidence that any of the rally's organizers threw the bomb that set off these events, 7 of the comrades were sentenced to death and 1 to 15 years in prison. The Haymarket Affair then led to further mass arrests and persecution of labor activists and immigrants in the United States, further cultivating the antagonistic relationship between labor and cops that still exists today. Despite Mayday's origins in Chicago, the US does not recognize May 1st as a workers' holiday. In 1894, Grover Cleveland made Labor Day a national holiday that falls on the first day in December. Not only is Labor Day intentionally meant to co-opt May Day, but Eisenhower later declared instead that May Day is quote-unquote Loyalty Day in the US, a day meant to quote-unquote celebrate the heritage of American freedom. The heritage of America, however, is not only unworthy of celebration, but demands our constant and ongoing struggle against it and for a better world. A world without capitalism and a more human world. That's why today, 134 years after the Haymarket Affair, the struggle continues. And with that, I'll send you back to Richard.
Thank you, Megan. 2006 saw the revival of May Day in the United States in a major way. Immigrants and other workers poured into the streets in the millions across the country in response to a bill, popularly known as the Sensenbrenner Bill after one of its co-sponsors. It was a horrible piece of legislation that further criminalized migration with some felony provisions and other restrictive measures against immigrants or anyone who helped or employed them. It had passed the House and was on its way to the Senate. The theme of May Day that year was a day without immigrants. A joyous mood pervaded throughout the day. It was a beautiful celebration. In New York, after a tremendous rally and a slow march downtown with 1 million friends, we saw as we approached our destination that the police, who were there to repress us, were so overwhelmed by the size of the march that they barricaded themselves in a triangular area off to the side with the metal barricades that were intended for us. This was a potent evidence of the power of worker unity. The real world of the police was exposed. They repress us under the guise of protecting us. They protect the interest of the ruling class. May Day demonstrations have diminished as repression against migrants have intensified under the administrations of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Another important factor is the contradiction that is the official union leadership, their narrow approach to organizing and their reliance on electoral politics keep them from assisting in the broader class struggle in any significant way. As with anything else, there are some exceptions to this that will be reflected on our program tonight. Today, there are thousands of missing immigrants, children who have been separated from their families, There are thousands more locked in cages, even during this pandemic. Their parents are locked in other cages. Many migrants have perished crossing the desert in the southwestern states, some undoubtedly murdered by racist vigilantes. Raids against and deportations of immigrants have increased, and police forces across the country are assisting ICE. This assault has driven many further underground where they are more exploited by unscrupulous bosses. That's my brief Mayday demonstration. I'm going to introduce the first speaker. Even as we have this webinar, Life Intervenes, our first guest is Priscilla Sinneth, who had to adjust her schedule today. She's actually has to go to work tonight and a little earlier than usual, so she cannot stay with us for the duration of the program. Priscilla is the steering committee member of the Durham Workers' Assembly, a vice president of Workers' Rights Commission in Durham, and head of the organizing committee of National Domestic Workers Alliance. Priscilla, can you share with us some of the work that you have been doing?
Yes, hi, Mr. Richard. How you doing? We've done a lot of work. We in National Domestic Workers Alliance are caring for our people who are suffering due to the fact of the corona, through giving out gift cards, taking gift baskets to the families that are in need, having Zoom meetings such as this one to check up on our members and stuff. Just a lot of different work. I'm a caregiver myself, so due to the fact that I'm a caregiver, I'm constantly at frontline. And the reason to me that the Steering Workers Committee is important and we should have important committees around the world is because, number one, workers are needed to build power. And we as the workers hold the power to run our cities. And as we say in our Durham Workers City Commissioners meetings, that we need to hold our legislators accountable for our well-being in the city. So therefore, we know that going to talk to our local legislators keep us politically connected because it's important to know what work they are involved in, but it's also important for us as the workers to let them know what is going on in their cities, because a lot of them don't know because they honestly just sit behind the desk. So when we build Workers' Assembly, we build solidarity and we build power amongst each other as workers, because without the workers, the city would not be a city. It allows us to give back to the community in many different ways through knowledge. It allows us to build leadership from within our own communities. Through the Workers' Assembly, I am now the vice president of our first Durham Workers Commissions team. And through that committee, we have partnered with the Human Relations Committee. We're learning different things of how to do grievances. We're fighting battles like Parks and Recs, who are wrongfully firing their employees. We're looking into our local city called Duke University members getting fired, wrongfully and fired for harassment, for racism, for numerous of things, for things as simple as they've been clocking in for the last 5 to 10 years, 5 minutes late because they have to ride the city bus. And so things of that nature, when new management takes over, they don't allow the people who's been running the city this whole while, they don't take into consideration that these same people who's been riding the city bus for the last 15 years to make your city run or to make your company run, now you want to fire them for being 5 minutes late. So things of that nature we're out here fighting against. People such as myself, right now we're in this crisis where at any time I can come in contact with the COVID-19, and it's a choice of whether I stay at home and protect me and my family, or do I go to someone else's home and risk the chance of not knowing who's been in their home and allow them to stay in bed where they can't help themselves at all, or do I take the initiative and go assist them getting out of bed, making sure they're able to do everyday routines that we as what we consider normal people do. So through this, we build much power within each other, and we become workers. If we are in a larger number, people have a tendency to listen to a crowd more so than an individual. So the power comes in unity, and it comes in numbers.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, and solidarity from the front lines here in Philly. And thank you for all the work you're doing and for making that choice to go out and care for people. Our second guest tonight is Workers' World Party First Secretary Larry Holmes.
Y'all have a good night.
I'm sorry?
So y'all have a good night.
Oh, thank you, Priscilla. Have a great night. Sorry, I have a cat on my desk. Our next guest tonight is Workers' World Party First Secretary Larry Holmes. Larry is going to speak on this current period and what revolutionary strategy we need. Larry, the virtual floor is yours.
Hi, comrades and friends. I'm having a little trouble with my video at the moment. So let me just proceed because, oh, there you are. How's everybody? You look like you're celebrating Mayday. Happy Mayday to everyone, both old comrades and friends and new comrades. This is the perfect occasion for all of us, for really everybody in the workers' movement around the world, to reflect on the real meaning of Mayday, International Workers' Day, the need for solidarity across all boundaries, the need for militancy, the need for revolutionary direction, the need for massive organizing, because no matter how bad things were for workers before this pandemic, they are worse now, and they're going to get even more worse. People are dying unnecessarily of this pandemic because capitalism does not value the lives of workers, all workers, but Black and brown workers in particular. Workers are being forced to go to work without proper protection. And on top of all of this, the global capitalist economy is sinking into another Great Depression. Some say worse than the one in the 1930s. This means all kinds of miseries and suffering. In the United States alone, there's an estimated 50 million people who have filed for unemployment in the recent month. They say 30 million, but even the government's estimate is that that's an underestimate, because a lot of people cannot access these state unemployment websites because they're crashing. And so many workers do not qualify for unemployment insurance. But the good news, if there is good news in this nightmare, is that while workers are freaking out and workers are traumatized, they're not paralyzed. They're fighting back. They're standing up. They're organizing. They're walking out in places where they don't have unions. You know, places like Amazon and Whole Foods and Instacart and other places where they don't even have a union. Many of these international businesses, the workers today decided to choose Mayday to have Mayday strikes. I don't know how wide they were, how wide the participation was, but that's a great thing. That's a sign of strength and militancy. People are organizing rent strikes. I don't know what the participation is in the rent strike, but it seems to be getting momentum. The important thing for us to know is that something important is happening, something that doesn't happen every day. It only happens once or twice in a century, maybe. Workers are beginning to fight back militantly, and they're beginning to organize at the grassroots, not the top down, but from the bottom up. And this has tremendous potential, and it could turn this nightmare into the working class being bigger, more organized, more muscular, and more militant. But it needs our help. It needs our help. It needs solidarity. We look to unions to help, and they're the better unions, like UE and some of the others. They'll help. They're already there. But unions do not represent more than 9 or 10% of the workers in this country. Hopefully that will change, but that's the situation right now. And so we've got to do other things. We've got to experiment with other things. What we're looking into is experimenting with expanding this concept of workers' assemblies. We look at our friends and comrades in the South, and they've had a Southern Workers' Assembly for a number of years, and they seem to have been able to get a lot out of that. And we think it's time that that idea spread from the South to the East, to the North, to the West, and all over. And our party and other forces is dedicated to doing what we can to see that happen. There are good things about workers' assemblies. It can't do everything that unions can do, but it's not just an industry. It could be organized on a city or region basis or a smaller basis, but it invites workers from everywhere to come in. Workers that sometimes don't seem to be welcome in the organized labor movement. Gig workers, workers who are called independent contractors, and therefore they don't qualify for unemployment benefits. Migrant workers, many of whom do not qualify for the unemployment benefits that recently were made available. And their life is hell enough. We think in terms of sex workers, who the movement doesn't even think as part of the working class, but we got to change that thinking. Even prisoners, comrades. Prisoners are workers. They are incarcerated workers. And it's time that we view them that way and give them their seat at the table of the working class on an international basis. A lot of young people who are forced into gig work don't understand that they're a vital part of the working class. They're getting radicalized because of what the capitalist crisis is doing to them. And we need to say, yes, you are part of our class. Welcome in. And moreover, we need your help. You learned some skills in college? Help us out with that. Help us out with that. It'll make our movement stronger. So this is what we're focused on. Unemployment is growing and growing to depression levels. We're going to need some kind of huge fight back for the unemployed. That's the way the struggle got started in the 30s, even before the industrial unions began organizing in the mid-30s. So we've got to think about that and commit ourselves to that. And by the way, if any of you are unemployed, either recently or long-term, maybe you can help out in providing some leadership for that. So my message on Mayday 2020 is organize, organize, organize. It's time that we made it clear that of all the issues facing our class, not just here, but everywhere, all over the world, the need for organization is first and foremost. And we must take this crisis, this pain, this suffering, these attacks, and turn it into the opportunity to organize our class, particularly the most downtrodden and the most oppressed, on the widest scale possible. By the way, if you're interested in a socialist party that prioritizes organizing workers, we invite you to check out my party, Workers' World Party, and we invite you to join it. Happy May Day.
Thank you for those remarks, Larry. If you like what you're seeing, please donate to Workers' World Party at workers.org/donate or on Venmo at Workers World. For those watching on Zoom, please keep your questions coming. Just click on the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen to type in your questions. Our speakers will be answering them at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Our next guest representing Existence for Resistance is Nancy Mansour. Nancy, please tell us how this Palestine fits into the question of workers' assemblies.
Peace, everybody, peace. Thank you for having me. Thank you for always giving Palestine a voice. So I didn't have long to prepare for this. I'm going to keep it as short and sweet as I can. So obviously Mayday for us represents everything that the Palestinian liberation struggle stands for. And as the majority of Palestinian political prisoners come from the working class, our refugee camps, our villages, it's these very same workers who put their bodies, their lives, and their freedom on the line for our respective freedom. Our political prisoners currently are at extreme risk due to this pandemic. You know, I spoke last week for Mumia Abu Jamal's birthday, free Mumia Abu Jamal. And I spoke to a brother of mine that's in jail in Palestine. He's been there 18 years since the age of 19. And there's so many things that he told me that I wasn't able to say on the talk last week that I want to say. You know, currently, these political prisoners, we're talking almost 5,000 political prisoners being held in Israeli jails. You know, not one test was conducted for the coronavirus until last Thursday. They tested 70 prisoners, 70 out of almost 5,000. The prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, had access to masks that they had to make 40 days after the shutdowns had already started. The Israelis refused to isolate any elderly, any children. There's currently 194 children under the age of 18 in Israeli dungeons. And of course, they're not allowed any phone calls, not because of the pandemic, because Palestinian political prisoners are not allowed to make phone calls, period. So my question is, why are we funding this? Why are we're already exploited as workers, but our tax money is paying for all of this. Our tax money is paying to murder Black and brown children all over the world. You know, we're struggling here to have healthcare, even with a full-time job. You know, if we learn anything from this pandemic, which and honestly, I feel like there's no way to even hide it. Even the most ignorant of I got to self-edit myself because I curse a lot. That's the only British thing I picked up. But if we learn anything, it's who's essential here. You know, the people that always judged us by our jobs are the people that are worthless right now. They can't do nothing for us. You know what I'm saying? It's the working class that are keeping this everything together for us. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, support everybody internationally. I echo exactly what Larry said, organize, organize. And the liberation of Palestine is bound to our joint liberation from exploitation, imperialism, racism, fascism, and capitalism. Existence is resistance. Happy May Day to everybody. Peace.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We will always stand on the side of the Palestinian struggle. If you want more information about the workers' struggle, you can go to workers.org, and you can also sign up for daily updates to be sent to your email. And we cover the Palestinian struggle along with a number of other international and workers' struggles. Now we will be speaking with Saladin Mohammed of Black Workers for Justice, who has been organizing in the South and building workers' assemblies. Saladin, tell us more about the importance of workers' assemblies and your work.
Well, I'm always glad to be on with comrades who are engaged in work and comrades from the from the Workers' World Party. I don't know, can I still be heard? Hello?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
We can hear you.
Okay, okay, all right. The South is a strategic region for the U.S. and the global economy. And too often, when we talk about capitalism and the capitalist crisis, we look at it through the lens of where capitalism had some of its strongest core industries in the Midwest, in the North, Northeast, parts of the West. But we don't focus on the South even after the 40 years of the economic shift of moving core industries to. So lifting up the South is an important part of our strategy in organizing during this pandemic, helping people to understand the contradictions of the capitalist system by showing what their responses is to the pandemic is also one of our aims in trying to help to build consciousness in the working class through struggle and through organization. The combined population of Black and brown people, Indigenous, Latinx, African Americans in the South is about 40%. The South is the largest region in the US. So, and it has the least percentage of unionized workers. The trade unions become an important element of any class struggle. We see utilizing, dealing with this pandemic also to organize workers throughout the South, to organize workers' assemblies to help to bore in to workplaces in the South and to help to build solidarity between the workplaces that we're trying to bore in and industries as well, like the meatpacking industry, like the nurses, which are national, but they have a concentration also in the South. The transit workers, key workers. We're trying to look at questions because the working class needs organization in order to fight. We're not just talking about identifying a day to mobilize to make a statement as a class, which is very, very important. We want to make sure that our mobilization of Mayday is tied to a strategy to bore in to the working class, to build rank and file organizations of the working class, whether there be rank and file organizations within unions, so that unions are not simply or mainly top-down, but that the rank and file see, the serious dangers of this pandemic start to see that control the organizations that they are a part of in order for these organizations to be effective. So this is how we see in the Black Workers for Justice and the Southern Workers Assembly organizing during this pandemic. And this is the strategic understanding of the South and why we see organizing in the South as part of the national, international struggle during this pandemic. It's an era to think that our prioritizing of the South in some way separates us from the national and the international fight back. For us, it helps to concentrate our organizing so that there are regions and zones of fight backs and organizing that's taking place as a part of this global struggle. For many of us, we have not seen a period where capitalism has been so exposed, where the rhetoric often of the left to try to define capitalism is not necessary. And in fact, you know, it becomes even more abstract because people are seeing it. Now, the left is obviously needed in order for people to understand what they see, you know, and what that means in terms of power relationships and the direction of society, whether society is moving towards correcting some of its failures, you know, or whether it's moving towards a more barbaric, you know, a situation for the working class. So we think and see that that are taking place across the country and possibly across the world, in the main, many of them are spontaneous. And the spontaneous struggle is the first response, you know, the first expression of resistance. So it's not a criticism, but it's an opportunity for the left that has some sense of understanding of the period, the class contrast, not only between the working class and the ruling class, and between the ruling class and the state and the oppressed peoples and nations, but also the contradictions within the ruling class itself. It's important to recognize as we wage struggle, as we identify particular industries to put pressure on, that it will sharpen the contradictions in the ruling class. And sharper contradictions in the ruling class can also mean breaches in the capitalist state that the ruling class dominates. It's important to have that understanding. And so our organizing in the South, our recognition that many of the governors of the South are the ones who are calling for people to go back to work, that many governors of the South refuse to take money even from the Obama administration to address depressed areas. And so how do we, from this region, also sharpen contradictions in the ruling class and in the state? And these are some of the things that some of us are trying to think about as we proceed to organize around the concrete problems that the work class is facing coming out of this pandemic. You know, how do we think beyond as we engage in the present? So that's generally, you know, what we are doing. This grows out of, and I'll conclude, a Medicare for All campaign that we have been engaged in since latter 2019. And as we fight around the immediate question, we also got to think about a demand that could represent a systemic change in the relationships between the working class and the ruling class. And a key systemic change to be tied to the immediate fight, Medicare for all, some kind of universal health care, so that you know, we're keeping that demand alive, both in the consciousness of the working class, but also you know, within the state and the ruling class. That's probably all I can say right now.
Thank you so much, Saladin, for your wisdom. We've always admired your work in Workers' World Party. Charles Jenkins, our next speaker of Transit Workers Union Local 100 and the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, is our next speaker. We know that transportation workers have been facing major issues during the pandemic. Tell us more about this and the work you are doing to fight safe working conditions. Sorry.
Well, comrades, I greet you in the name of the Million Worker March, the May 1st Coalition, the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, and TWU Local 100, better known as the men and women that move New York. It's important for the history of Mayday, Workers' Rights Day, that we build unity, that we build workers' power, and that's what all of the comrades are talking about. But 16 years ago, Million Worker March called for a march on Washington, D.C. for workers to speak in their own name. And we returned back to our places all over this here country. And in 2005, the Million Worker March reclaimed Mayday to make sure that we can, again, continue for workers to speak in their own name, to demand not just for unionized workers, not just for American-born workers, but for those of the least of, immigrant workers. And so we have been on the streets, and I'm so glad that we were on the streets today during this pandemic. But it shows that workers' determination won't even let the challenging times stop us from raising our voices. Why should it? They threw us into the front line of this pandemic. And so you ask about transit workers. While they play a Monty called a shell game, you are needed, you are frontline workers, you are essential. Oh, wait, we can't say essential because that may mean you're entitled to more benefits. That may mean we got to pay you more. Well, brothers and sisters, what it means is that transit workers all around this here country, and I just heard about some transit workers on Saladin, the program that you had, where the brothers was talking about, and we certainly faced it here. Frontline workers, essential workers, put the battle in this here pandemic with no proper PPE. Today we face a rising number of transit workers here in New York, TWU members, killed in the line of duty. due to COVID, due to a company that didn't prepare them, but insisted on them coming to work each and every day. And as workers, we're prepared to report to work, but we demand a safe workplace. We demand a safe work environment. So the struggle, even for our unionized workers, those workers that are still going into work every single day, while we do have the PPE now, while they have made social distancing on our buses a priority, where members and where the riding public is not going past our bus operators, they actually enter through the back of the bus, giving less contact to those operators. But this is 5 weeks too late. But we continue to go to work each and every day. So we fight for those that are still here. We fight like hell. We know the phrase, mourn the dead, but fight like hell for the living. And that's what we're doing. And so the fight back today with the unity that we're talking about, it comes around benefits. It comes around making sure that every lost soul, that every member that's waging the fight against this here COVID war, that all of us essential workers, and that workers, we define who's essential, not the bosses that's sending us out to do our job each and every day. And you heard our sister said on this here program, she had to make a decision whether to stay home, safe with her family, or be that worker that she knows she is, and that all of us, that we're on the battle line because we want to help somebody. We want to help our own. And so that sister went to work. Like so many of our brothers and sisters are in transportation, they go into work. And they're seeing their co-workers who they worked with for many years not coming back to work. We got to fight for a mental recovery in this here country. Workers are going to be devastated. Just like when you come back from war, it can't be business as usual. Our members will be devastated. So we're going to be needing some mental recovery. I'm here to report some good news because we have a fight back union that puts members first, that fights like hell. And we had in our contract demanded inline duty members, their family members, be paid $500,000. And of course, we had a company that fought us on that. Said you can't prove that they were working on the job, that they caught COVID from on the job. And we fought and we won. And every single one of our members that's lost in this horrific COVID pandemic, their families will be getting $500,000. And it's not enough, brothers and sisters. Because the mental damage that's being done to those of us that are still here on the front line is going to be a heavy, 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 heavy burden to repair. So we got to demand through our workers' assemblies that so many are talking about, through our current platform of unionized workers, through our platform of unorganized workers, we got to come together as one working force. And the demands for essential workers have to be demands for every single worker that's on the front line, that before this pandemic, they wasn't even seen as essential workers. Who would have ever thought that the grocery worker was essential. They are. Who would ever thought that that truck driver that's doing all of those miles on the highways and byways, that he was or she was an essential worker? They are. And so many more are essential workers. And so not for just for transportation, but for every frontline essential worker, we got to call on legislation. We got to call on Washington, on this failed government, to make sure not some, but every on the front line that we determine that's essential, that's been doing it every single day, going to work in fear of catching COVID, in fear of actually dying. Well, they big up the healthcare workers and the police, but we can't stop there. Brothers and sisters, Mayday, being in the street reminds me that workers' voices have to be raised, and they have to be heard, and we have to demand justice, not for some, but for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that incredibly powerful analysis. If you are interested in getting involved in the struggle and joining a revolutionary socialist party, a bunch of people tonight have been emphasizing organizing. As Saladin mentioned, the first manifestation of struggle is spontaneous struggle, but only through organization can we carry through this struggle to the point we needed it to get to. And there's, I believe on the screen now is the link to Applied Workers World to join our struggle. Our next speaker is Joshua Dedmond, National Outreach Coordinator for the Cooperation Jackson, the organizers who called for the May 1st general strike and the monthly people's strikes. Joshua, can you tell us more about these calls to action?
Indeed, thank you. May I first say onwards, comrades, in our struggle, as we advance our struggle in this moment, as so many of the speakers have said before, in this moment where the inherent contradictions of capitalism are greatly exposed and capitalism is reeling. Knowing that capitalism is reeling does not mean that it is not reactionary. And so we invite everyone in this moment, the working class in this moment, to imagine a future where we would like to live, where, as Brother Jenkins just spoke, where all work has its value and the lives that labor are valued. In this moment, capitalism has devalued our lives, and we must be clear in what the opposition is. The forces of capital that have usurped our narratives, that has taken our interest and put the interest of profit over the lives of people, over our brothers and sisters, and has manipulated that in an imperialist fashion across the globe. This is a moment where all of us can struggle together. And so we, within Cooperation Jackson, in calling for this May 1st action, identifying that the powers that be, the oligarchs behind our capitalist opposition, are rushing to put us back to work for their profit and for us to make meaningless wages. And so we have come together in this moment calling for a united front, calling for a moment of unity without necessarily uniformity. There are 16 demands that have been initially put out by Cooperation Jackson. Some of those demands are for the immediate moment of proper protective equipment, for the immediate moment of cancellation of rent, knowing that that although there are eviction moratoriums, that there is still rent for folks who have not been accessible to work, and then for proper protective equipment for those who are deemed essential. And there are demands for a longer term strategy, demanding housing as a human right and Medicare for all and Medicaid for all. We are calling in this moment for an end to the sanctions across the world that are crippling other nations as they face the COVID-19 virus, the coronavirus. And so we are calling for a moment of solidarity across the board for the working class. And as we are building our new iteration, as we're building our future, we must actively fight and resist the temptation of capitalism. So within Cooperation Jackson, we, of course, being a network of worker-owner, worker self-directed enterprises or cooperatives, are taking this moment to say that this is a moment where the left can be greater unified, that the left can be greater organized. And we invite you not only as we participate in a historic May 1st, a historic International Workers' Day, we invite you to continue to build with us, to continue to fight with us and build power within the working class. Again, this is a moment for unity, not uniformity, knowing that we come from all types of organizations and organizational structure, but we all know that this is a glaring moment for us to emphasize the power of organization, the power of organized labor, the power of organized communities, the power of organized people who are willing to fight with and for one another. And so we constantly invite you to this moment. This is, we consider May 1st an impetus, a stimulus, if you will, for a longer term strategy as we continue to build. Our comrades within Corona Strike has asked for a resurgence or a repeat of all of these actions again on the 1st of June, and repeating these actions again on the 1st of July, as we know that this is just a small spark. And as we are constantly building and developing and working towards the opportunity for workers and the working class to be unified, to have power, to struggle together, and to build our new world. COVID-19 has been a watershed moment for all of us, and it has invited us to see, do we want to return to capitalist exploitation? And while these critical analyses are being built across the world, we can really galvanize all of our people and build power for them. So I don't want to be long. It's been a very, very long day filled with actions. I'm sure actions across the nation. I'm sure all of us have participated in some. But I do want to end with this statement: power to the people, all power to the working class. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joshua, and thank you. And we've always appreciated the work of Corporation Jackson. Thank you for your work. Remember, folks, that you can support Workers World and with prisoner subscriptions. We have a prisoner subscription program at patreon.com/workers, WWP, excuse me. Workers World provides free print subscriptions to our newspaper to any currently incarcerated worker. We're currently not printing, having a printed issue because of the pandemic and the risk of it, the distribution of it being an aid in spreading this virus. But we will continue this, of course, after the crisis. Also, we encourage you all to save the date of May 16, when Workers' World Party will be hosting a special one-day event about which road to socialism. More info on that will be announced soon. Now, our panel will be taking questions. Our first question is, and I think this is a general question for any panelist who would like to respond. I'm a staff member at a large public university. Any tips or resources to consult in helping realize and shape what workers' assemblies at the university level could look like? That's the question. And any panelists that would like to field that can unmute. Okay. Workers' assemblies at the university level. Okay. Well, I can relate to this question. I am aware of some good work that happened, for example, at Harvard some years ago with the dining workers who were having, some problems, and there was this collaboration with students and the union. I think to effect some change by petition in the university, and it did work. They did not have particularly an organization called a Workers' Assembly, but that is the kind of collaboration that could happen in a university with maybe local unions. Most universities have organized unions that work in kitchens or in some form. I work in a university, for example, a medical center, and there are at least 4 unions. And worker-student collaboration is one way that this could be done. I think I see Larry.
Yeah, just to take up from where you finished off, Richard. In recent years, graduate students have been organizing for union rights and the right to negotiate with their employer, with their bosses, and to get contracts. And this is interesting and promising, because it wasn't so long ago that we didn't look at graduate students as part of the working class. But lo and behold, for many reasons, which I don't think I have to go into, true about so many new sections of the working class that weren't seen that way recently. Graduate students and students are part of the working class. I don't know whether this is related to the concerns of the person who raised the question, because I think they said they were talking on behalf of or coming from a private university. Although the situation I want to mention briefly could affect them. People like Charles Jenkins and transit workers, our comrades and friends in the South, particularly, who are working for the city or state, whether it's hospitals, sanitation, whatever. Local governments are going to be facing enormous pressure to cut budgets. After all the austerity that we've already been through, austerity that was one of the reasons why the pandemic was able to have such a devastating blow, because there weren't the hospital beds, there weren't the health workers, there weren't so many things that should have been there and would be there in a really just society that put people before profits. But one of the big things that's going to be happening politically and economically is this question of local and state budget cuts and how it impacts the services that we rely on, the workers that we rely on, and the danger of it adding to this growing numbers of depression level unemployment. And I know that people who work in local and state government and unions and others who, who have been concerned about the shrinkage, the austerity, the evisceration of healthcare, the evisceration of education, which is one of the reasons why those education workers started rebelling in places like West Virginia and Kentucky a few years ago. They couldn't take it anymore. Not only because they weren't getting what they needed, they couldn't afford to pay their bills, but they didn't have paper and pencils for the children. We need a strategy and a discussion to take this up, because this is going to be a big issue. We all recall what happened to Detroit not too many years ago, and how its city council, whatever you think of it, was told to just, you don't have any power anymore. We have a board here that is going to take over your city's finances, and basically any kind of even any cover for democracy is sort of just thrown out the window. Bankers now run the city. We could see similar developments. We got a situation like that in Puerto Rico, probably in other cities like that. But that's what's going to be happening. I don't know how private universities are going to be affected. I imagine that the students who don't have a lot of money or are in a lot of debt, and don't have rich parents, they're going to be catching, the bad end of this.
Oh, sorry. I neglected to say the name of the person who asked the first question. It was off screen at the time, and I didn't see it. The name of that person was Rigel Tomlinson. So sorry, my apologies. Our next question is from Sue Harris. How do workers organize workers' assemblies? That's also for any of the panelists.
Saladin.
Go ahead, Saladin.
Yeah. Well, workers' assemblies, what we a criteria that we're laying out is that workers' assemblies form when workers from at least 3 workplaces can be brought together. And these workers from these 3 workplaces, may have small numbers, 2 or 3 or 4 numbers, who will be focusing on building organization at their workplace. And the assembly provides an initial framework for solidarity and also building, community support. Sometimes, you have workers' assemblies, and they are led almost by people who don't have no relationship to a workplace somewhere. And in that situation, these folks need to be targeting at least 3 workplaces in order to fully begin to develop a workers' assembly. So I think it's a criteria, at least, we see it in the Southern Workers Assembly as building roots in the economy from the standpoint of manufacturing and service, and that's how we generally have seen it. Now, again, there's going to be some assemblies that are maybe defining their targets as the unemployed, like unemployed councils and these kinds of things. It's important to have targets, you know, that begins to target some section of the working class. Because if not, you know, we just run the risk, you know, of a whole bunch of people defining themselves as workers' assemblies and almost, you know, defining what the direction has to be in terms of the fight back, et cetera. I mean, that's generally how we've been looking at that. And just one other question I think was asked about other countries. You know, what we're finding is that to recruit people into an organization or into a campaign, people want to know whether you have a base, you know, that's carrying out some expression of the campaign that you're trying to recruit them into. And so again, you know, digging in and establishing a point of movement, a point of organization, again, I think is important to recruiting, you know, that section of the working class from the workplace.
Thank you, Saladin. There's a question from a Michael DeMarco. There seems to be a new propaganda disinfo. Sorry, I just disappeared from my screen. Campaign against the DPRK in the form of baseless rumors that Comrade Kim Jong-un is gravely ill or has died. I'm curious as to the WWP's response. There also continues to be endless anti-feminist propaganda. I'm curious about the party's efforts in building a trans and non-binary inclusive socialist feminist for the 21st century. Thanks. That was from Michael DeMarco. This question is directly to Workers' World Party. I think you're muted. You're muted. Okay.
Is that better? Yes, Workers' World Party is longtime supporters of the DPRK and very, very conscious of efforts over many, many decades to undermine and undo the DPRK. This is efforts at the behest of imperialism. Forget about what Trump says about being this or that person's friend. We think that anything that the imperialist media is saying about the DPRK or its leaders has to be taken with a grain of salt at the very least. And it's probably wise to just be very suspect about it. You know, why are they saying it? And what are their plans and machinations behind it? And frankly, I always worry when they start talking about some change in the government, some change in the status of a leader. You know, call me a little paranoid, I'm not sure, but I'm already thinking ahead. Are they trying to create some pretext for some military adventure? This is what they did in Grenada. This is what they did in Panama. This is what they've done so many times. Apart from that, just don't take what the imperialists are telling you about the situation as far as anything going on in the DPRK. Let it come from the DPRK, or let it come from people who are trusted friends of the DPRK. And as far as that goes, in terms of the rumors that have been spread around for a few weeks, I would deposit them in a very small, insignificant, and unimportant place called rumors.
Sorry, I need to unmute. Thank you, Larry. There was a second question, and I can take that. It's actually pretty easy to answer. I'll repeat it. There also continues to be endless anti-feminist propaganda. I'm curious about the party's efforts in building a trans and non-binary inclusive socialist feminism for the 21st century. We already are that party, Workers' World. We have very strong guidelines against any form of discrimination, and we are very inclusive with our members. Our members come from every demographic, sexual identity, sexual orientation. We even had a sex worker caucus in Workers' World Party. So if you're looking for that party, I think you have found it. Let me look for another question. I was busy answering that one I wasn't reading. We're getting close to the ending the program. I don't think we'll be taking many more questions today. What we can't answer, we will try to answer in a different way. There's a question from Diane Mathiewicz. There was a pretty large Solidarity caravan in Atlanta of about 150 or more cars that got very favorable responses from drivers in other cars, pedestrians and workers who came out to wave or raise a fist. How do we reach these workers in a more substantial way?
Saladin.
Go ahead, Saladin.
Yeah, I think, you know, we have to try to find a way to identify them. We in our webinar got a number of contacts. We looked for clusters in terms of locations. We looked for clusters in terms of existing organizations. We looked for clusters in terms of industries and sectors. And then, you know, looked at who were part of those clusters and figuring out how to communicate with them to begin talking about forming workers' assemblies and workplace committees. Again, I think, you know, when large numbers of forces come out, particularly during mobilizations, it's so important, you know, to have, you know, somebody's assigned to try, you know, to get their information. I don't know whether there's a starting point, you know, for the caravan, and whether, you know, forces are at those starting points, trying to get information, whether it's going to be from the driver of the cars, even if they got 2 or 3 others in the car, or what, you know. But that information has to be gotten in order to figure out how to reach them and how to talk with them about uniting and beginning to build workers' assemblies.
Thank you again for that answer, Saladin. Another question, this one from Judy Greenspan. Could the speakers talk more about the need to organize incarcerated workers into the larger workers' struggle? Okay, you're muted.
The question of the struggle of prisoners is very, very important to our party. And I think it is to other progressives and revolutionaries, and it should be for so many reasons. First and foremost, prisons are where Black and brown people are deposited because society, capitalist society, has no place for them, but can exploit them or warehouse them in these concentration camps. The question of understanding prisoners as incarcerated workers is an important one. And we need to, as the party, we have thought a lot about it, but we need to think more about it. And the entire movement needs to think about it. And we need to push the labor movement, perhaps some unions at first, to think about it, recognizing prisoners as incarcerated workers and considering what kind of union status or affiliation would be practical. This is most important, both for the day-to-day circumstances of prisoners who are exploited. Everybody knows that. They make things, they are at call centers, you pick up the phone asking for something, you think you're talking to somebody who's employed by some international corporation, you're talking to some prisoner in Texas or in Tennessee or something, just to see this as a part of our class. Yes, they are in unique and difficult circumstances, but they are still a huge part of our class. And when you talk about the oppression of Black and brown people, when you talk about the national question, when you talk about our youth, and the prison industrial complex, it all ties this together. So the goal would be to proletarianize this demographic that is behind bars. And in doing so, not only welcome them as members of our class, but also, if not physically, at least politically, perhaps to some extent organizationally, break the worst form of oppression that prisoners suffer, and that is isolation. That is isolation. We have you behind bars, and we can basically do whatever we want to, and nobody cares, and nobody's here, and that is your, that is your predicament. We can break that to some extent with class solidarity, political consciousness, and by finding some meaningful ways to do that. I look forward to the day, and this would be just a symbolic thing, and hopefully it wouldn't just be one of those symbolic things that don't mean anything, but there's something under it. There's an organization under it, and there's a lot of work that has been done. And the organization of incarcerated prisoners reflect this symbolism that, you know, incarcerated workers are represented officially at the highest levels of the organized labor movement, and that they are consulted, especially about issues that are of direct concern to them, but about all the issues that are a concern to every section of the working class. Finally, I think some of you know that in recent years, there have been bold efforts to organize prisoners as incarcerated workers. And on several occasions, including recently, either regionally or beyond the region, there have been attempts to have work stoppages, incarcerated workers' work stoppages. When the committees that are organizing these incarcerated worker work stoppages around concrete demands, how much they're paid to do work, the right to be unionized, other things, health care, all the things that any worker in any circumstance would be interested in, you know, but other things like parole and getting the hell out of, you know, this dungeon, that we make it our business to support that. I must say that while I disagree strongly with a lot of what some of the anarchist groups do, I don't need to go into that because that's not the reason why I'm raising it. I applaud them. I applaud some of the groups that have recognized prisoners as incarcerated workers, and from being on the outside, help them with some level of resources and some level of publicity. And I think that it just shouldn't be up to them, that forces with even more resources should be involved in this effort of incarcerated workers to organize, and on occasion, on a small basis or on a larger basis, have work actions.
Thank you so much, Larry. Before we wrap up, we just wanted to open up some space for our panelists to make any closing comments, particularly the panelists that didn't get a chance to hop in on the Q&A. If anybody wants to jump in, you can unmute, but after that, we'll be wrapping up for the night.
Yeah, I got an opportunity to answer some questions that were directly about Cooperation Jackson in the Q&A. So if I hope that those answers satiate those questions. But I just want to wrap up with one, to applaud all of our efforts for this Mayday, and two, to constantly remind people and constantly invite people to build and fight together, and power to the people. You all have a good night.
Awesome, thank you so much. I would just like to thank our amazing panel for a great discussion tonight, and thank you to everybody watching at home for joining us. Please follow us at workers.org and sign up for daily updates, news, and for more upcoming webinars. We've been doing these on a weekly basis, including a special Workers World public meeting that's coming up on May 16th on Which Road to Socialism. So with that, good night, comrades, and
good night, everyone.
World.